I go into a lot of schools around the nation, around the world, and I see this sign a lot, and I really hate it. I have kind of a problem with anti-bullying programs, which are prevalent throughout schools. And this sign is kind of the sign of an anti-bullying program. I've got four problems with anti-bullying as an approach. And I want to go through those today and then give you an alternative or an idea for an alternative. So the first problem that I have, or that exists with anti-bullying programs, is one of definition. The word bully, I could ask all of you to write down what your definition of bully is, and I would probably get a different one for each person that's sitting here today. And in fact, I did this at a middle school a couple of years ago. I asked the kids to write down. I gave them 3 minutes to write down some ideas of what a bully is. And they came up with 89 different definitions. And that's a communication problem. If everyone in the room has a different definition of what a bully is, we have trouble understanding what we're talking about. And a lot of anti-bullying programs lead or actually end with a pledge. And a lot of schools do this by themselves as well. They ask all the students to pledge that they won't bully. Well, it sounds good, but it doesn't really work if everyone's got different definitions. So if I was your student and you asked me to pledge to not bully, I could put my hand on my heart and say, absolutely, I won't bully. But tomorrow, I could start calling people gay slurs, whatever, calling names, because I don't think that that's bullying. My impression of bullying is punching someone, physically hurting someone. So I can actually make that pledge and stay true to that pledge, even though, by a lot of people's definitions, I'm bullying. So you can see that can be a problem school-wide. The other definition problem recently, because of all this exposure, the word bully has become kind of a buzzword. And what that means is that a lot of parents start calling schools and saying, my kid's being bullied, when they came home from school one day having been called a name once. Being called a name once is not bullying. It has to happen over time. But I've talked to principals, I've talked to assistant principals, and they get these calls every day from a parent who said that their kid has been bullied. And so one assistant principal said to me, there's a difference between being a bully and being a jerk. The problem is, we have all these laws now requiring schools to take action when there's claims of bullying. And if you've got parents calling every day, reporting bullying, you're in a bit of a quandary. And this is what really makes a mockery of zero tolerance policies on bullying. If everyone's got a different definition of bullying and you've got a zero tolerance policy, you're going to have an empty school. That's the problem with the definition. Second problem I have comes really from 80s movies. And most of the adults that are running our schools are very familiar with 80s movies. 80s movies had one thing in common. Well, apart from Molly Ringwald, but they had two things in common. They had a big bad bully. And this big bad bully picked on some poor little person. So you think about Back to the Future, you think about Karate Kid, think about James Spader in every movie as this big bad bully. That's the image that a lot of our administrators and our legislators have in their head of what bullying is. And this is simply not true. I know it's very hard to believe that a Hollywood presentation of an incident would not be true, but it is not. The New York Times published a study a couple of years ago where they had interviewed students throughout a broad range of middle schools and high schools, and they asked them to identify who was being bullied and who was delivering the bullying. And what they came up with in the data was that more than half of the students were involved. And this is hard to match with our idea from the 80s movies. The reality is bullying almost always happens as a way to climb the social ladder. Half of the students in the school are doing this on a regular basis. They're putting others down to increase their own status in the pecking order. This is why when your kids come home from middle school or high school, they tell you that that they hate their best friend, right? Everyone's involved in this, essentially. The silver lining of that study was that the top 2% on this pecking order in schools are not involved. And I think this is a great opportunity for schools to identify these people and go to them and say, hey, there's a big problem here, we need your help. Those most influential kids in the school can help. The other thing that was missing from 80s movies was the internet and cell phones. They can be, well, they are very powerful tools. And they can certainly increase the severity of bullying. It spreads quicker, spreads wider. And on the flip side, there's a whole lot of positivity that can come out of this power as well. But the reality is, as adults, we just have no concept of what it's like to be bullied that way. We just have no concept. We think, oh, we get beaten up in the cafe and have to deal with that every day. The reality for a lot of kids these days is that it's happening all the time. And it's happening to very large audiences. So that was the second issue. The third issue with anti-bullying programs is that the word bully is a label. We use it as a label. This causes problems because a lot of the people that are doing this, especially in the younger ages, are doing it because they don't have the social skills to climb that social ladder by themselves. What happens when you ostracize someone who has poor social skills? They're going to revert to what they were doing in the first place. And these labels stick. And kids know when they've been labeled a bully. And if they walk around the hallway and they see no bully zone or block bullies, you're telling this group of people that they're not welcome in your school. It's a big issue. The other thing is because of this legislation that requires people to address bullying, we have a situation where, I saw this a year and a half ago, you have kindergartners who get identified as bullies. Kindergartners. And some of these kids have never operated in large groups before. And we throw them into this classroom, 25, 26 kids, and we expect them to know what to do straight away. And if they don't, in January, we've labeled them a bully and we've started a process. The problem with this is that kindergarten teacher is then going to tell the first grade teacher, or you've got to watch out because Jim's a bully. It also occurs with the families. So parents say, don't bring Jim over to your birthday party, he's a bully. And this goes through first grade. It goes all the way through elementary to middle school to high school. Do we really want to be labeling a kid who had problems 6 months into their school life as a bully for the rest of their life? What do you think that does? The final piece that I am against is that anti-bullying really is a negative focus. I used to work at a summer camp. I worked there for 12 years. And when I started as an innocent little counselor, we... too many of you know about summer camps, apparently. We were encouraged to make rules in our cabins. And there were rules like, don't throw stones, don't run, don't get into fights. They all started with don't. And this was just the norm. This is what we were expected to do. Well, after some years, I rose up the ranks at this camp and I became the summer camp director. And I had the idea to reverse this. So I created a set of rules that were all do's. Because when you have a lot of don't rules, they get abused. So I'd have a don't throw stones rule. And I'd be out with my kids and some kid would throw a stone. I'd say, don't you know that there's a rule? I mean, we've seen the rule in our cabin, don't throw stones. And he'd say, oh, that's not a stone, it's a rock. So we'd have to go back and write, don't throw rocks. And then we'd have to write, don't throw sticks. And then the next day we'd have to write, don't throw squirrels. And you end up having this enormous list of don'ts. Well, we switched that around, so we had a rule that was leave it on the ground. So if something was on the ground, it should stay there. That prevents all throwing of small mammals and sticks and stones. And so I had the Big 10 rules, and it worked almost like magic. I mean, the kids understood it, they understood the breadth of them, and no one ever asked me why there were only 9 rules. That was kind of a proud moment for me after a couple of years. No one ever wondered why there were 9. We need a positive approach. This anti-idea, this let's get rid of them, is not something people respond to. As adults, you don't respond to that. We need something positive. So my proposal is that building pro-hero schools is better than building anti-bully schools. And my first complaint about bully was a definition problem, so I owe you a definition of what a hero is. A hero is someone who does something for the good of others despite a risk. There has to be a risk there. And if you know anything about these bullying issues, there's a risk to stand up to do something about it. You could stand up to the person doing the bullying, certainly risky, right? You can become the target. You could also help the person who's getting bullied, get them away from the situation. Just ask them, can I help you? So heroes definitely are a solution for bullying. And in fact, it's the only solution. If adults had a magical wand, Mr. DeWitt had a magical wand, and I'm assured that he hasn't, he would have waved it. If we could fix this problem, it would have been fixed. The only way to fix the bullying issues are to get the kids to stand up and do it. Bullying doesn't happen in front of adults. It happens in front of kid audiences. It's done specifically for that. So we need to encourage our kids to become heroes. Now, to do that, they're going to need some training. And I want to give you kind of a blueprint on what this might look like. It is scary to be a hero. So we need to train the kids on how to stand out. One of the most powerful forces keeping them from acting is that they want to be part of the crowd. They don't want to step out and be different and be the person, be the one person. But the fact is, this kind of courage, any kind of courage, is contagious. Once one kid stands up to this, others will join. And as I said earlier, if we can get that top 2% of the pecking order on our side, it can be magical. The other thing you can do is to expose the kids to hero stories. In the psychology research and work that's being done on heroism, there's a term called heroic imagination. And this is the idea that we, in our heads, can imagine ourselves doing something heroic. And that allows us to overcome some of those barriers. And the way to increase your heroic imagination is, well, there are a number of ways, but one is to actually listen to hero stories. Now, we're blessed with stories coming out in the movies every week, with TV shows. All of these stories have heroic behaviors, and stories were designed for us to reflect on them. We don't do a whole lot of that anymore. We write scathing comments on their blog posts or talk to our friends about how horrible the acting was. But the stories that are successful, if you think about the most successful stories, most successful movies, they have key stories of heroes overcoming things. Think about every Pixar movie. Every Pixar movie can be used to teach. So if you actually sit down with these kids and talk about what they've seen, it's going to make it easier for them to become heroes. The other way to do it is to talk about the stories that you see in the news. When you see a story of someone doing something heroic, last week, it was a week ago today, the Boston bombing. Talk to your kids about what you saw there, where average citizens were running towards where the bomb had been to help. Ask them what they would have done. Tell them what you think you would have done. And be honest about it. Think about what the advantages are of doing that. So talk about heroes that you see. And it can be, again, it can be historic heroes. There are lots of resources on the internet to discover the stories of these larger-than-life heroes and even everyday heroes. Get your kids thinking about it, and they're going to be more likely to stand up when someone needs them. So I encourage you to think about this in your home, this in your schools. Start thinking about a positive approach, training your kids to be heroes. And a school full of heroes is a school that doesn't have these individual negative problems that a lot of schools get individual programs to target. A school with heroes is a school without bullying. A school with heroes is a school without vandalism. A school with heroes can even be a school without apathy. So let's build some heroes. Thank you very much.